Ayin Beis, Volume 1. We're up to chapter 110, page Reish Yud Gimel. It's page 213. We're in the middle of a discussion here of the significance of Yaakov establishing a monument. As it began the previous discourse, that's what was the whole discourse was based by heaven acheives, asher samti, matzeva. This stone that I have placed as a monument, as a pillar, should be Beis Elokim, should become the house of God. And this becomes also significance in the relationship with Lavan when Yaakov finishes. That's before he began his journey. At the beginning of the journey when he went to Haran, after the dream, and he wakes up. And God makes all those promises. So he makes that covenant, that promise in return. And then, at the end of his journey, Yaakov, before he goes back to Israel, he also places a stone as a matzeva, as a pillar or monument. And Lavan places a mound. But now we're in the discussion more specifically of Yaakov's work. Yaakov's matzeva, which of course is a holy type of work. So briefly, to sum up what we've learned that Yaakov's entire journey to Haran represents the Yeridas HaNeshama B'guf, the soul's descent into Haran, to a dark world. The purpose being going from a world of Achdus, Be'er Sheva, the fountain of seven, to a world of Pirud, of the diversity and division, a world of Ischalkus, in order to bring together all the separate fragmented elements of the world and reunite them with God. And it's not just a reunion. When you achieve that, you achieve higher levels that would not have existed. The general principle of Dira B'Tachtein. This is symbolized in his taking all the stones. He took from the stones, because stones represent letters. And as Alter Rebbe explains, that letters, why are stones letters? For two reasons. One, because like stones, you collect a bunch of them, you can build a building from it. The same thing, the letters of this world, even though on their own they're all scattered, together you can create a beautiful structure, which is a dira, a home for God, a Beis Elokim. A second reason it's called stones, because stones are inanimate. And just like the inanimate on its own is very distant from life, it doesn't have a revealed life force, so too the letters of the world are very distant from the divine, because they were created through malchus, through dibur, through God's words. So it represents the distance. But the goal is to bring them close. So this is the symbolism and the meaning behind Yaakov taking the stones together. Now, he took them together and then they turned them into one stone. This Evan Achas is now what he makes a matzeva. What's the significance of that? So we've learned this Evan Achas is malchus, which again symbolizes now the whole material world that he's now united, but now he's elevating it. So it's called Hakomas HaMalchus, the lifting of, the building of Malchus. It's the expansion of Malchus, which essentially is bringing in Giluyim into Malchus. Malchus on its own is just a nekudah, just a stone. The Matzeva is what he calls a partzuf. And he builds it up, and of course that would in turn become the Beis Elokim, something that becomes the Beis Elokim, which we haven't yet discussed in this discourse. In the previous discourse, he did discuss it, that Beis Elokim is already more than just a nekudah and a partzuf. How did he put it there? Zochar. That's why it's Yeh Beis Elokim. Yeh, in other words, Yeh is the masculine, even though Evan Zeis is the nekudah, because you're elevating it to become a mashpia. So it's essentially three stages. Nekudah, it begins as a point, and that's unrevealed. A partzuf is a full configuration, a full entity, and then that leads to Beis Elokim, a structure. Beis Elokim is the house of God. As he says, it brings it up to the level of Zachar, which is where it becomes completely transformed as it will be in the future. And this is what Yaakov achieves. In the last chapter we learned that there's two interpretations in this malchus. There's malchus as it is in Atzilus, and that's turned into a partzuf. There's malchus as it manifests in Biyah. That, in other words, how it just goes into existence, and there you elevate it. Basically, it just shows that the transformation is even on a deeper level, all the way within existence. I just want to say as a footnote, I've been looking at the discourses where this is based on. It's obviously fascinating. You get to see literally what the Rebbe Rashab, what forum he had open when he was writing this. So it's a very interesting study. And in addition to that, you also get a sense of how it was going on then. Because the Alter Rebbe, interestingly, the year Tovkuf Samachvav, I find, Shabbos after Shabbos, he was discussing the same theme and developing it. The theme of Kalim and Levushim, garments and containers, then Parsa and these curtains. It just, you literally can relive how Chassidus was being created, to be very honest. Anyway, there's a little different interpretations there. Here, I believe everything was malchus, am I right? He says, so though Chachma was a Yud, he said that's not really the Chachma. Malchus is the main Ayin here. Just a second. Okay. So let's read now, chapter Kuf Yud. Okay? One time.
In the Alter Rebbe's discussion, is it in relationship to the Yetei also?
Yeah. The thing with the Evan, 100%. So V'hinei ba'avodah yesh lemer, now we could say in avodah, in service, he's going to explain this whole thing now in service, what I just summed up. Shezeh yin mailas nefesh alakiz, yesh lemer, we could say Shezeh yin mailas, pulas, nefesh alakiz b'nefesh habamis. This is the impact, pulas, the effect, the work, the pulas, the activity, but it's more, the pulas, the nefesh alakiz is pu'ula on nefesh habamis. It's impact on the divine soul and the animal soul. Literally forcing it, in a force of coercion, imposition. In actuality. Because for obvious reasons. In other words, we're not talking about that he works through his avodah, through his surah, that he shouldn't want to have in Yanim Chumrim. That there should be no desire in the animal soul for crass items. You see, once you poil on someone that you shouldn't want it anymore, there's no force involved. You've essentially educated him to change his mind and change his values. But here we're talking about where there's actually the Nefesh Habam is in full force, and the Nefesh Elokis is imposing itself and basically saying no. Now, what's this avodah? I'm not really sure which avodah this is. It sounds like it's the avodah HaMalchus goes into Biyah. In other words, what Yaakov is doing was he's taking an Evan, as it is an Evan in Biyah, not in Atzilus. So in Biyah, in other words, it's in the domain, not of Elokus, of the divine. It's in the domain of Biyah, which is already a Nifrid. And that's where he makes a Matzeva. It seems to me. Let's see where he goes with this. I'm just saying, because he says, Gam Yeshlemer, we can also say, Shezein mitzvahs maisius, Belishum kavana v'ratzon primi. We could also say this is mitzvahs maisius, actual actions, where you just do a mitzvah without intention and inner desire. Just actually doing it, performing the mitzvah. So now he's going to explain what the nekudah is.
Maybe also the word maisius is in the Lashon Ba'asim al Tzedakah, that we force. It's forcing himself to do it.
Yeah, fine, but yeah, possible. Yeah. It seems that he's talking here how malchus is mispashet in biyah. Okay, let's see where he goes with this, because again, it's brief, very short. I just want to say, okay. Gam yesh lemer, we could also say, shezeh inyan mitzvahs maisis b'lishum kavana kevan. B'inyan nekudah yesh lemer, what's the nekudah? Because remember, it all is beginning with a nekudah, with a stone, one stone, that we said was a point. He said before it's nekudah samalchus. There's nothing there. Diminished state, no kalim, and you're going to build it up. So he's going to say nekudah yeshazel b'chinas nekudah salev. This is the point in the heart, nekudah salev, like the pintele, the spark in the heart. The point, the spark in the heart. B'chinas knesses Yisrael, k'meshi b'chinas katnus. Let me explain. Knesset Yisrael is just an expression usually used in Kabbalah on malchus. It really means Knesset Yisrael. Literally means the community of Israel, or the gathering of Knesset, the gathering, the Kehillah like. But it's a word used whenever you say, for example, you'll say Zohan Malchus. You'll say Yichud Kutchabricha v'Shchinta will sometimes be Kutchabricha v'Knesset Yisrael. So it's a word from malchus in context of souls. Just mentioning Knesset Yisrael. But in the state of katnus. That's the nekudah. In other words, as we spoke earlier, the maturity of malchus is like the birth of the moon, the beginning. the early stages. What is an avodah? An avodah, it's a stage where it's not yet developed into a full-blown entity. It's just a kernel. It's just a seed. It has, like you said, Keser Malchus, that was the nekudah, it has all the power in it, but it's all not revealed. So Naveda is saying this is nekudah Halev. In other words, that's why it's this Aveda, that Aveda, in other words, that the Nefesh Habam is not developed yet. It's not like a mature Aveda. It's now just like you tell a child, this is what you do. Seemingly that's where he's going. Faith alone. The take of God, even though faith has in it a strong intensity, like it says, the nation believed. The nation believed the Discourse because the Discourse of the moon of their faith, our forefathers, our ancestors were redeemed from redeemed, referring to the Amunah that they had when they went out of Mitzrayim with Egypt. So it's very strong. You see how powerful it is. That alone, that merit alone, without anything else, without any called primis de kaved of their mind and hearts and so on, they were redeemed. Nevertheless, there's no izgaluser. There's no revealed light. When you see someone does something, pure faith does not have any revealed element to it. It's you do it. You believe. Like we says in Teireh, the Maimar of Zocher of Amalek, meaning because there's other Zochers. There's Zocher Yom HaShabbos, the Zocher of Amalek. When you begin to expand, the expansion of das, which means a person becomes a bar das, not just a pure, just plain faith, but Chovas Hadas, Avedis Hashem, where he's doing it with a expansion application. He applies himself to it, and he puts his mind to it. And Chovas Hadas, a broad word. It means just basically doing something with thought through, doing something deliberate. It's not just full commitment, intimately connected to it. Zeh hakomas hamalchus. That's hakomas hamalchus. As we said, that's taking malchus the nekudah and making it a matzeva. It's the uplifting and the growth and the building of malchus. V'hu inyan hageula. So the amunah is the cause, and then that is the geula. The geula is when you build malchus up, not just that you have amunah. I guess he's referring to nigla avesenu. The b'schus amunah niglu. That b'schus amunah they come to niglu. He's giving seemingly a deeper interpretation of that. In other words, not just they got redeemed technically. It means b'schus amunah, b'schus the nekudah, there was the hakama. Like they were lifted up, which is something like a sukkah on Nefelis.
It's also the suicide related. It's the expansion of the das, no?
Yeah, it doesn't say details here. It's again very dense here, very short, but you can understand the nekudah. So in other words, let's see here. And this comes with a greater power, as you said earlier. In order to make hakomas hamalchus, you need a greater power, like the king's simcha, the joy that overflows, and it overflows, and therefore reaches deeper in, and expresses in dibur. Okay, fine. We could also say the slapshus aras hamalchus b'chinas kechapel benifel. You could also say, now he's going to the second interpretation, because he's saying, remember before he said kechapel benifel by malchus and biyah, not just malchus and atzilus. He said the words already said just two madregas. He said, right. Second madrega is how it's slapshus kechapel benifel. End of the chapter. Yeah. So now he's going to that interpretation. He's basically interpreting this whole last chapter in avodah now. You could also say the slapshus ha'aras ha'malchus b'chinas kechapel benifel, malchus manifestation in the kechapel benifel as the power of the craftsman in the craft, or the power of the doer in the product. It's in the form of concealment and covered up, where the divine is not in any way obvious or revealed. In other words, this is not just that from the concealment of the divine energy, like we discussed earlier, the diminishing of the moon, Mir Tayrech. If you recall Mir Tayrech, it says that at the bottom of the page, Ayin Beis. Let me just review what he said. Yeah, Yeshlem. So what did he say there? That is when Hashem God tells the moon, diminishes it, because in order to go and to give life into Biyah, the moon has to diminish itself. So he's saying not just that diminishment. In other words, there's two concealments here. There's one concealment, which is where Atzilus has to go into Biyah, like a teacher has to go to a lower student. So there has to be a diminishing. Now he's saying, no, another dimension. He's talking about the garments of Biyah, going back to Levushim now. Remember, even though he's seemingly gone not directly connected, but it's all a discussion, and I'll connect it in a moment. I'll sum it all up in a minute. We're also talking about the concealments of Levushim of Biyah. So let's again clarify this. When energy manifests in containers, there's a concealment going on, but it's primarily a revelation. Because what are Kalim? Kalim are words. So when a teacher uses words, there has to be a certain element of distilling and channeling. So he's concealing something, but it's primarily a revealing. It's a revealing agent. That's what it primarily is. And we spoke earlier, Kalim to Eris. And the contrary, without the Kalim, the Eris would remain completely concealed. The Levushim has a different role. We spoke Levushim, their primary thing is concealment, and the revelation is less. Like, for example, when you wear clothing, for outer clothing, the body and the faculties are revelatory forces. They're not meant to conceal, they're meant to reveal. They don't reveal everything of the soul, but what they reveal, they reveal. As we spoke, Chochmah, Bina, so on, Das. When it comes to Levushim, when you wear garments, you wear them either because it's cold, or for other people. When a person is in his purest form, like Adam Acheives and Gan Eden, there's no need for garments. When you're with yourself, there's no need for it. So clearly it's a concealer. Yet there's a Levushim that still reveals something. The question is how much? But now in Levushim we also learned that there's levels of Levushim. There's a Levush that is like letters. Okay, fine, a teacher is using words. But then he starts using metaphors. And he uses metaphors and riddles. Now the words are becoming disorganized. So in words itself there's two levels. And that too, there were two levels. There's words as they're engraved letters, disorganized. That's the Pasha before Atzilus. The Pasha after Atzilus, between Atzilus and Biyah, is disorganized letters, but also like written letters, so it's in other words, examples from completely different paradigm. So you just see here, basically levels of concealment, and they all exist in the transmission from a teacher to a student. So, and then of course there's Lavan, who takes the garments and turns them into cloaks, and basically trying to create completely nothing to get in, or almost nothing, almost no energy to emerge. Complete garbled. The Gal. So he's going back now. He's saying Biyah, the Levushim of Biyah. We're not talking now how the malchus is diminished in order to go into Biyah, into that lower world, but we're talking about the Levushim of Biyah themselves. Okay.
Why do we say Levushim, though, are such concealment when we have an Indian of the Levushim of the Kohanim, the Levushim of the Kohen Gadol, where it says one of the problems is that they were lacking a Levush, then their services is nullified or whatever. It would seem like the Levushim of the Melech, the Levushim of the Kohen Gadol, is something that is necessary and actually amplifies their...
So that's why I said there are levels. Chassidus discusses this. It discusses exactly. Leviel Levush Malchus is a very fundamental mimer in Torah. It's on the Megillah. So Levush Malchus, in that case, is the Levushim that are positive Levushim. Remember, as I said, the Parsa, for example, the Levush before Atzilus, is a very powerful one. So Levushim, it all comes down to Levushim. Even if it's a concealer, there's a concealment of Kedusha too. Not every concealment is bad. They're negative. A melech, for example, when he wants to express himself, he needs to speak. Machshava, dibra, ma'aser are levushim, you have to remember. So there's a very important role. As a matter of fact, in some places we'll even learn that the levush has a root that's higher than theirs in Kalim. Because to conceal requires... So it all depends. In the Maimorim where it talks about Big Day Kodesh, actually some of that is based, some of the ideas we're going to learn here. He's going to mention it. The Big Day Kodesh, Sisa Big Day Kodesh, the Big Day Kahuna is a whole thing. There it's talking about Levushim where the goal is to express through the Levushim the higher energies. This is a similar to here. Yaakov is going into Biyah with his Levushim, and that's Charan. And that's where he's elevating the stone and turning it into a matzeva. So Levushim is not synonymous with negative. Levushim are...
Concealment.
It's concealment, but it's like Like in other words, it's Tzimtzum, Eiris, Kelim, Levushim. Actually, there's four expressions. There's the expression is Eiris, Kelim, Levushim, and Hechalas. It's basically tools. And the Levushim, however, have the potential also to be like any concealment.
The Makshavah Divar Meiser is an expression.
Yeah, but he spoke at length. Compared to the faculties, they're a concealer. Compared to the faculties, they're concealing. Because you can change them all the time. You can change the Makshavah, you can't change your faculties. There's a whole section on it. It's all relative. It's all relative.
But by thinking that, it can affect our faculties too. It can bring in new thoughts. It can refine our...
So there's a whole chapter. I refer you to a chapter that talks specifically about this.
I see. What chapter number?
Kufay 105. Okay. I just want to add one thing since already I'm on it. This also, I realized immediately. Evan Hazois, Evan Saper. Stone. So basically, Yaakov is taking an inanimate stone from Biyah that's completely separate and turning it into Evan Saper. Now, I did a little more research on the Saper. The Tzemach Tzedek brings... No, go that way. Go that way. Yes, a Saper is not a sapphire. The Tzemach Tzedek brings Evan Saper. Because also, it's so strange, it also says the luchos were Evan Sampirin. Which is so the Tzemach Tzedek brings from the Radak. He says that sapir is a white stone, and he says clearly crystal or diamant or diamond. And then he says that Ibn Ezra interprets sapir as a Evan Aduma, a red stone. And he says the difference is Yashleim, the difference in the kelim of malchus where gvura dominates, so it's red, and the kelim of zah where chesed dominates, it's white. So right there, so I think I'm going to write something about this. It's not sapphire stone. I would not translate evidence. I keep translating sapphire. It's not correct. It's definitely an illuminating stone. But it seems to me that it's not an illuminating like let's say the Toya Tassel Lateva, the stone that just gives off light. This stone clearly is a transparent channel of the light that goes through it. So I looked it up a bit. The diamonds and actually these clear stones, these crystal stones, they don't have their own light. They just the light refracts through them in a way that makes them more brilliant. So it's a brilliance not from the stone; it's a brilliance of the light. But the stone, but here I don't think it's here. The kelim, I think, more transparent is the right word. Not because the kelim are not adding, but maybe he means it also refers to that they add something. Because when you have containers, it draws out more energy. Anyway,
how would we understand the red stone though? According to that,
no, it says malchus. Malchus is gvura dominates. So red would mean it has a red tint. That's what it means. It's still revealing. It's a red shade, a red tint, yeah. Anyway, I'm just mentioning it because I think Evan Hazeis, when we say this stone, Evan Hazeis is that he's taken the avonim of the world, which is pirud, many. From them, he's turning it into Evan, turning in malchus into a matzeva, into beis alakim. So you literally have the whole work of him taking from the world of all the way from the concealments and levushim all the way back to Evan Sapir, and of course going through Mispur and Sipur as well. Okay, so let's continue. So now he's talking about the second interpretation. So he says, what is the avodah, the nekudah in Biyah? So now we're talking not concealment just from the regular concealment of malchus going into Biyah. We're talking a concealment that is added on by the levushim and the garments of Biyah, as I just explained at length. He's giving an example, like in the Elam HaTachton, this lowest of worlds. He's talking here generally Biyah. I should qualify and say when we speak Biyah and Atzilus, when he speaks Daveda, it sounds much more he's talking about Asiyah Gashmis and Chumris. Because remember, Biyah compared to Atzilus is a general term for creation already as it manifests, that's not divinely connected and united. So, what do we have here? Should be on. Is it on? Yeah. Oh. What happened?
Why is it on? Because it's zoomed in probably.
What?
You're going on the camera, it's just probably, this is the input. You're zoomed in too much.
Oh, that's it, okay. Fine. Yeah.
It wasn't like this the other day.
Okay, you can change it. Fine. So now he's talking. So like we see in the Ilam HaTachten, she'ein eliki elokus nida v'nigla klal. That the divine revelation, divine divinity, is not at all revealed, it's obvious or revealed at all. Even though in everything there's a divine light and energy, has a b'chinas hester legamri. It's completely concealed. My sadav, we see this b'poel. Yeah. Completely concealed. He's talking in general, even before a mitzvah. He's just talking in general. That's because of the dominance and the overwhelming power of the yesh, of the, let's call it the self, the ego, self-containment of this lowest of worlds. The bedugma kazei's benefeshu, what's in a nefesh, in avodah nefesh, who hisapshus a nefesh alakis benefesh abamis, is the manifestation, the enclosement of the divine soul in the animal soul. Bechinas hester, in a form of concealment. Acheives nefesh abamis misgabrim, because the faculties of the animal souls dominate. Umaylimim, and they conceal, mastirim, and cover ala nefesh alakis, on the divine soul. And when it's in that type of situation, the souls of Israel are called Esther. Esther from the word haster, covering. Haster is panai. So let me just sum up what we're talking about. So he's talking now, remember there were the two interpretations, malchus and atzilus is in a diminished state. So we spoke that avodah, that was already discussed earlier in this chapter. It's a diminished state. What is that? That's when the nefesh abamis is at full strength, and you impose. And there's no kavanah pnimis. He said that's al derech like the amunah. That's not yet, it's still only at a point. It's not yet developed and matured. And hakomas malchus is the acheives adas in avodah. And now he's speaking how malchus is in biyah. So here, it's in a state of additional concealments because of the garments. And the example is like in this world, nothing is revealed. Now he's explaining in the nefesh that this is in a situation where the animal soul dominates. Basically, this is a level that we're all at. So this is easy you don't need explanations. Just think of where you're at. You'll know. Esther. As it's known that sometimes Knesset Yisrael. See again, the Knesset Yisrael. It's a reference to malchus. It's basically, Gemara even says the lashon. The neshamas are Knesset Yisrael.
Knesset is attached congregation.
Yeah, what did I say before? I said kehila, congregation or community. Yeah. Here, Knesset, the word in Tanya says Knesset means Knesset. Like it's Knesset. It gathers together and draws in. Yeah. Okay. So that's Knesset Yisrael. So sometimes they're called Rachel, sometimes Esther. I just want to say Knesset Yisrael is a general name, like the Gemara says. I think in Avodah where it says that even Elam have. But it says Atshi Yichel Neshama Shebeguf. So it says Eitzu Shenik Veguf. Okay, now I'm confusing it with something else. No, bottom line, Knesset Yisrael is this category like that of when you speak about all the neshamas, like basically with their root. Yeah. She says sometimes they're called Rachel, sometimes Esther. V'hainu kishiyesh is galos eira nefesh. When there's a revelation of the energy of the soul, sheritzenu licholol be'erein sof, and his desire is to be encompassed in the infinite divine light. Shosha Mekeda Nikra B'Shem Rachel. Then its root and source is called Rachel, because Rachel refers to revelation, a revelatory. U'kamay Rachel Lefnei Gezen Lama.
Before the shearing of the wall.
Right. So there, Rachel is referring to. Or Rachel is referring to Rachel, actual Rachel? No, it's referring to the like a eder, like a.
Rachel is like a ram, yeah. A ram.
So what's the Taitna Lama in Pashta Pash? Right? Before, no, she's quiet before.
He doesn't make any problem.
Okay, Rachel lefnei Zeh Lama. She's quiet before the sharing. Okay, what's the Pirush Lama? The Pirush of quiet, the silence with lashon shtika. The word's quiet, silence. Shu'ina bittul. It's the level of bittul. וכמוין קציין טבחה, שפשטס שיורה לשחיטה. Right, tzavara l'shchita. Like a kazen when you're shechting, when you're slaughtering, when you're shechting. How would you translate shechting? Not slaughter. A sheep.
Ritual slaughter.
Shepeshet is sevara, that you first you have to like uncover. You have to peel off. What's the word? When you take off like the.
No,
it stretches out its neck. Stretches out its neck.
Stretches out. He's not talking about. Okay, shepeshet sevara l'shchita, berotzen poshet. That's the word poshetis. In other words, shepeshetis. So you're talking about what is the level naved of all these expressions? Why does a sheep go with such silence? And it stretches out its neck. In other words, it's like accepting, Kabbalah sale. Is because you're talking about a level that's a revealed level. It doesn't have to be forced. It's in a state of bittul, quiet silence, and it stretches out. He says the taichet is stretching out. Savora, that's rotzen. Savora is rotzen, and peshet is poshet. Rotzen poshet. So it's a basically the simple desire.
No, detaching it like that. Maybe just bring it right, and it's at the bittul.
It sounds to me like that. Rotzen poshet, peshetis. That's what I think. Maybe not. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it just seems so.
Right, because the word poshet is like excellent.
And savora sometimes say that's why it's confused with say. Savora is also sometimes I think explained with rotzen. I have to look it up. The same is with every one of Israel. Shehir, it's saying that his desire should be libatel, to be nullified or subsumed or sublimated. Ulichol encompassed be'edi is baruch in the divine energy. Lemahava echad be'echad. Lemahava echad be'echad is an expression used like one, like in something like in Kagavna. Lemahava echad be'echad, where one meets one, so to speak.
Confused.
Yeah, the fusion of the move the bottle. Lemahava echad be'echad, to move one into one. So all this is the level of Rachel, HaNeshamas Yisrael, in the state of Rachel. Because Mashul Bizgalus Bislavos Nikra Bechinas Rachel, and as long and all the time, as long as in this state of revelation and Islavos and passion, Nikra Bechinas Rachel, the Neshamas are called the state of Rachel. Avodah goes to Esther. Al Beish Ein Hadover Bizgalus Nikra Bechinas Esther. But at a time when it's not in a revealed way, then it's called Esther. As I said, the word Esther from the word Hester. And even though this desire exists in every one of Israel, nevertheless, it's covered up and concealed. And this concealment comes from the animal soul. Like it says, like the rose among the thorns. In other words, we're talking, remember, Esther Nikra Shoshana. Esther and Shoshana is the same name. And Shoshana, what's a Shoshana? Like it also says by Rachel, Shoshana. So Rachel, when she's bein acheives, when she's between the thorns, means when she's in the clutches or surrounded by Ameinim or Mastirim. The thorns are referring to the things that block and conceal. Esa Shoshana, they conceal the flower, the rose. Then, when Rachel was taken away from Lavan's house, right then you have actually Shoshana. Yeah, then is Rachel that's more Begili Aveda. So Rachel now is like connected to Yaakov here, because remember he went to Haran to meet Rachel. So bottom line is, what do we have here? That's V'heim kol inyon ha'elam. What are all these thorns? These thorns are all the matters of the world. Umaysa elam haza. And the activities and the actions and the goings on in this material world, hanasim b'chol lev v'nefesh, that are happening inside every heart and soul. That's what he said. Okay, let me explain what this means. He's saying this is all the matters of the world and all the things we're preoccupied with in our heart and soul. That's the thorns. So every soul is connected. Every soul has the power of this desire that he's talking about. But on its own, it's in the form of nekudah. That's what he's saying. This is how malchus is in biyah. Speaking the avodah of it, malchus is trapped in biyah. It's like it's like a rose among thorns. So there's malchus, how it's rachel. That's when malchus is revealed. Avodah is revealed, and that's how malchus is, I guess, in the atzilus, or at least revealed its connection. And that's when when they said that's when like the sheep has the bittul and so on, and you feel the open desire, the revealed desire. But the rest of the time is in a state of Esther. The malchus, the rose, the flower, is concealed among the thorns, and the thorns are the things that keep that preoccupy and consume our hearts and our souls, which is all of us. And he's going to explain, because be'emes, the way we're supposed to do physical things is supposed to be b'lei lev alev. The way we're supposed to be involved in this world is called b'lei lev alev, without a heart and a heart. I'll explain in a minute. Let's see how he says it here, and I'll explain what this means. In everything you do, the way it's healthy should be a intention, a divine intention. You're not just doing it for self-preservation. You're doing it for a higher purpose. And even though we must have this gashmi, we are compelled to be drawn to this gashmi. We need to eat. We need to sleep. We need to survive. We need shelter. We need clothing. Nevertheless, just because you need it doesn't mean you have to have a taiva, a lust and a desire for it, a physical and crass desire. What you have to look at is, okay, I need this. I have to find the point of how am I supposed to receive the divine energy in this. When I get
the nourishment from the tzutzis that are inside.
Right, exactly. To get the nourishment from the sparks within. Same thing in business. It has to be with intention for the sake of heaven. What does that mean? Why are you working? You're working in order to be able to exert yourself in study of Torah, l'kayim mitzvahs, and to do mitzvahs. But and he has to know that the primary thing, like we learned earlier, is the blessing of God is that gives you wealth, not your effort. Therefore, he won't be troubled, he won't be concerned and anxious. Kol kach, that much, be'esik, in his work, in a way that it shouldn't be an obstacle and a resistance to davening, l'tfilah bizmana, to daven in time, or la'esik ha'teira, and to studying Torah. Al kaponim perek echad shachris, perek echad afris, at least one chapter a day in the morning, one chapter in the evening, which is like the minimum. So in other words, that's the way it's supposed to be. He's explaining how it's supposed to be. So summing up, he's supposed to be a lay level. It means you're supposed to be there, but not with your complete heart. Because the main point is this is only a keli, first of all, to give you life, and second of all, it should be for you to be able to serve God. Basically, kol masech l'shem shamayim. This part doesn't need so much explanation, right? Okay. But this is basically malchus in biyas. Everything we learned from the ma'ir de'er and all the Kabbalah before, this is what it spells out. That's where that's in the engine room. We learned it. Now we're learning it in real life. In the engine room is this malchus that's a nekudah. It's like the moon. It has all the power, but it's invisible. It's just being born. Okay. Now it's not. That's the way it should be. That's be'emes tzarich liyas. But now here's what the flower, the rose, gets trapped in the thorns. Now we're going to the thorns. What are the thorns of our lives? But when you do the physical things with your entire heart and soul, then they're called thorns. And they're concealed. They conceal this level of the malchus of Knesset Yisrael, the level that inside is there alive, but they conceal it from being revealed. So this is Ratzon, the desire of every soul to connect to the divine, is concealed among these thorns. Let me just explain this a bit. Even though it's, I think, self-explanatory, but just may help a little. Let me say the following: what Belay Lev is. A few examples. There's the story of Kusia Lepler, I think it was. Was it him?
When he gets broken
No.
down
Where he used to make his calculations. Yaman Kletzker, you're right. Yaman Kletzker, sorry. So he was a businessman, and he'd make his calculations, and he would write, let's say January, Tishrei, profit, loss, income, expense, cheshbon, income, expense, and calculate it all. Then he came to the bottom, the totals, achakel, he would write, Ein Eid Milvade. There's nothing but God. So the Rebbe asked the question, if he's so consumed with God, then he should write it on every line. How does he have the presence of mind to calculate? So the answer is because he wouldn't be a businessman. Then he belongs in the kil, which isn't always a compliment. Meaning, you have to do esik masa matan b'amuna. You have to do your business faithfully. You can't be a battle. You have to be ethical. You have people you have to deal with. You have to give them cheshbonus, you have accountability, etc. But when the sum total, when it comes to the sachakal, what's the purpose of it all? Is Eneid Milvade. In other words, there's a paradox going on here, because it seems much easier. Either your presence of God all the time, or you're in business, and some people create that compartmentalization. To have both, to be in business faithfully and do it on the terms of business, and then know what the real kavanah is really asking a person to really be in two places at once. That means B'loi Lev V'Lev. That means B'loi Lev V'Lev. B'loi Lev, not with the heart, but with the heart. And some of it is there. Well, like the story with the Rebbe Rashab, where the chassid was a big chassid and once was a top student, then later went to business and became a galoshes manufacturer. Made a lot of money, because in Russia, the roads were not paved, so galoshes saved a lot of shoes.
I think that in America wasn't even paved.
Okay, but this happened in Russia. And then Rabbi Rashab met him and he said, feet in galoshes I've seen. I've never seen a head in galoshes. Meaning his whole body, his whole being, his whole soul, his whole love and nefesh was in the galoshes, in the business.
You ever said this for braodenging?
Many times. Cup in galoshes, yeah. And the point, however, is your feet should be in galoshes. You have to have your feet firmly planted on the ground, but your head, especially the top part of your head, save for Shamayim. The feet firmly planted on the ground, as they say, and your head in the clouds. There are people who their feet are under clouds, and there are people who their head is in the galoshes.
So that attaches to Giyah Kapecha.
Yeah, Giyah Kapecha. There's a lot of explanations. This also explains Yosef, the big chiddush of Yosef, the Gabi the Ovis, even though he's talking about Yaakov here, is that all the Ovis chose to be shepherds. Why? There's a reason why. Because sheep are very docile, like he said. They're very easy to tend to. And they could spend time meditating and davening and learning in the meadows. They didn't want to be involved in Wall Street. They didn't want to be involved in the hardcore marketplace. The first one that was thrust into a place, he also began as a shepherd, Yosef, but against his will, he was thrust into slavery and then ended up being by Potiphar. It says there, the Targum says, he was the first Jewish accountant, basically. And then, on the account, he became the viceroy, ran the whole grain industry, which turned Egypt into a superpower. So you can imagine what he was involved in. And yet, the chiddush is that even though Yosef, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov are chesed, gvura, teferes of Atzilus. Yosef is malchus as it goes into Biyah, the child of Rachel. And even though he was in Biyah, worse than Biyah, Ervis Haaretz, the lowest of the low, the most decadent society, he maintained his integrity. So in other words, he was in the world of business and he did not become part of it. He stayed above it. And it's explained in Chassidus from the Seder Hayom. It's a sefer from the Rishonim, I believe, where he explains why does the Gemara say La'olam yehei adam zoeh b'tfilas hamincha. Person should be especially careful with mincha, because Eliyahu was answered But when Ayoyo prayed, when was he answered? Leinan elabet filas hamincha, during that time. So the Seder Yeh Master Chassidus brings this question: why? Shachris is a far longer prayer, Ma'ariv, and you have Shema on both of them. Mincha seemingly, there's no such thing as less, but it's the shortest. Why is this special? So it says, he explains, because it's the middle of the day. Precisely. Shachar is before you go to work. Ma'ariv at the end of the day. That's how it used to be. Today too, for many, depending what time of the year. But Mincha, in the middle of the day, while you're immersed in Biyah, in the marketplace, where you're doing Masa Matan Abuna, he says you have to do it. You're part of it. You still maintain, you're able to tear yourself away, and daven, that has a power to it that the other tefillah prayers don't. I remember when one of the times the Rebbe spoke to Machne Yisrael, development, it's one of the things, a very interesting thing he said, which a few businessmen told me who were there, that it really helped them. He used to give advice, by the way, business advice, but not business as in what to invest in, psychological advice. So one of the things the Rebbe said, that many people think that, if you're a consumer of the business, you have to be in it all the time, and nothing else should be going on. Total focus. The Rebbe said, total focus doesn't mean you have to do something 24 hours. Total focus means that when you're doing it, you do it completely. And he said, so therefore, if you're able to take yourself in the middle of the day, or you have a share in the morning, and so on, it's not you're doing that for your Jewish obligation. That creates focus, because it means you have a focus in your life. So when you go back to work, you'll have even more focus in the things you're doing. That was the Rebbe's his advice. In other words, the idea is to have your priorities in place, and when you're focused there, it helps focus other areas. It was an interesting insight there. But anyway, going back to this, so he's talking how it's supposed to be. Chaychim, the thorns, is when the rose is trapped.
You said Yosef was malchus, but I thought Yosef was Yisod.
Yisod, that when it goes, he began as Yisod, then he goes into Mitzrayim. That's when Yisod goes into malchus and then into Biyah. That to be precise. Okay, so now let's continue here. So this is all an example. This is all Navedi is talking now. How the nekudah. We spoke about the nekudah of Ma'ir, Matsev, Akamas, Malchus. So Malchus begins as a nekudah. This is what it is, a nekudah. Nekudah means it's trapped. It's the stone before it becomes a matzeva, before it becomes a monument. Siman Daled. And this is what it says in Ageres HaKedesh. In Tanya, that is. Fourth section of Tanya. Daled, Siman Daled. The fourth section, because he enclosed the inner nekudis levavi point of his heart, because there it talks about how there's the two sides, so that's the orla, the covering, the layer, literally foreskin, that covers on the bris. But naveda, it refers to a blockage, basically, that the channel is blocked. Yeah. Yesh leimer hakavana. So the Rebbe Rashab says, we could say the kavana on this al mashakos b'teirer pashas sisa das mele tachas l'reishi. He doesn't say what. I have to look inside there. That the kavanah here is what it says in Teirer, Pashat Sisa, the Maimer Smela Tachas L'Reishi. I'll look it up and I'll keep you posted. V'nekudah ha'primi shebelev.
It goes together before the
Yeah, I'm just reading how to read this. So the Orla is Mechasas Abris. V'nekudah. 1 second. Okay, I have to look inside Tanya. Is there a Tanya here available? Let me look at that. What's the difference? Oh, okay, fine. It doesn't matter. At this point, it's all the same thing. Let's see exactly what he says so we can understand it. I should have looked it up. Okay. Okay, yeah. Basically, yeah, I thought so. So basically, it goes like this. There he talks about. He uses the Mila and Arla as an example, but before that, he goes into the whole thing with the Lev. There's the Primis Lev, the inner part of the Lev has, of course, a desire for the divine. Then, as it manifests, the other side, where it comes into Nefesh Abamis, it's obviously concealed, and there's a battle going on. You have to have the Mila, you have to maltem to circumcise, so to speak, to remove the block that conceals your heart, that locks up, that blocks your heart. And that is revealing that. So that's, he's using Lashenis, it's just very brief. So he says, Mepnei shehilbish, b'chinas primis nekudah love, the nekudah primis love, you need the nekudah primis love to be revealed. That's what he's saying. V'ayim ha'shekoseh b'lekutatei redav vayidaber, b'midbar Sinai ba'el ma'id. And look what it says, look at the Torah, the Maimer vayidaber, b'midbar Sinai ba'el ma'id, that's b'midbar. V'sham, again, this is brief, just bring the sources. V'sham, and look at the Torah, that is, says the slapshus v'hester b'chadei shalei dezeh yir bir nefesh abamis. That the mislapshus, this, the garment, the in clothing, that he says that the hester and the concealment is in order that there should be the refinement of the animal soul. The kamoy kenu inyan, go back to parentheses, the kamoy kenu inyan is slapshus malchus mash mistateres b'biyah, or they neged the biyah. And the same thing is what we're talking about here. That malchus is clothed and manifests. What does that mean? Means, the same thing is with the enclothing of malchus. Remember, we said here, we're not just talking about how malchus gets diminished as it goes into biyah. We're talking about the garments of biyah that conceal on it. What is that? What it gets concealed in biyah is through neged the biyah. Neged is the layers. Like the nega, the layers. Nega is klipas nega. It literally means a light, but it's not a revealed light. It's a very distorted light. Nega. Nega, you also say nega means a reflection, a glow. But this is talking about a glow that is concealed through the layers of the levushim. Huh?
Is that the thorns?
It looks like it. Yeah, that's more or less the thorns. Tizgabes hayeshu sumenega. Parentheses within the parentheses, and the overpowering of yeshus, the overpowerment of self, is from nega. Nega is a klippa that covers up. No. Then it goes. Now he finishes. And the intention in this of malchus going into these garments is in order for it to be refined. And this is through the prayer. This is what he says in Tanya, acheives. This is through the prayer b'rish be'esh, with the flaming fires. V'tzemoyin, and the thirst, v'tzaikas halev, and the heart's cry. Okay. So before we go to the next parentheses, basically, he's all explained in nekudah. This is all in avodah, the nekudah, meaning the stone, before Yaakov does anything with it. Before he turns it into matzeva, rather. So now another parenthesis. He's saying where he took it from. What was discussed earlier is from the Maimer V'Teisef Esther. Remember, Esther is that level. The Mavur Sham, it's explained there, it's explained there that the concealment is on the inner dimension of the heart. And it's also, it's giving us a little inner. It's also apparent that that's the intention in the Maimer, in the Bamidbar Sinai Maimer, L'kutei Torah, they said on line 3. Obviously, to appreciate this, you've got to learn it inside. But I'll just read it here for now. And the refinement, and the refinement, okay. So there, he's saying all this is taken from Maimer and Esther, that the concealment is on the inner dimension of the heart. He's going to qualify this because he wants to make it more relevant to the way we're discussing it in this Maimer here. And how do you reveal it? The refinement is through the Rish Be'esh, is through the flaming fires of the on the neshama of the soul, v'tzaikas halev, and the cry of the heart, b'tfilah, in prayer, shuhi not tshuva. So that's tshuva. Yeshlema, we can say, shezel lahafrid hara, kol kach, that this bitter, when you do this bitter through the fire, the passion of the soul and the cry of the heart, that is in order to separate the evil. Acheives yisala b'atzilis, to the extent that the good should elevate in Atzilus. So let's explain this. The rose, or let's put it this way, the soul in each of us, talking people like ourselves, is trapped among thorns. What are the thorns? The thorns are being consumed with Elam Haza. Everyone in their own way. Whether it's overconsumption with the business, whether it's your own personal taivas, whatever it may be. So you have here a neshama that's trapped. The goal, obviously, is to free it. How do you free it? Through some type of deep thirst or passion to the divine. By Baal Tshuva, that comes from a big lack. When you're really lacking something, it causes a backlash effect. For the rest of us, it doesn't say here the Eitzah. Everyone has to work on it in their own way. But the only real solution is you can't just, when you're consumed with this world, it's not just easy to free yourself. You need something powerful to schlep you out of it, because it's a very powerful, seductive force. So he's saying, when a person cries out, well, first, when a person has passion and cries out, what is that doing? It's separating, because it's trapped. Think of it like someone's held hostage, and someone's holding on. There's a prison here. How do you schlep someone out of prison? You can't just go and say, okay, hey, let's go. They're trapped there. Psychologically, they're trapped. Talk about being trapped in Golos, our Golos mentality. So you need something to jolt you out of there. You need like a real shock treatment, so to speak. That's what he's saying. So with this bitter, what it does is, why do you need to cry? Why can't you just say, you know what, okay, I'm going to start being focused more where I should be focused? Because you're trapped there. And anything that's deeply embedded needs a lot of power to schlep it out. And when it does, that's what he says, it's lahafrid arakokach, that you separate, you separate the negative to the point that the good can go to Atzilus. Think of it like, and I'm going to use a strong example. I deal with this, unfortunately. You deal with people who become addicts, drug addicts, alcohol, other addictions. And many people, I would say most, but many for sure, have very good qualities, but they're now trapped in the wrong place. They're being used in the wrong place. They're completely consumed with things that are destructive. So what do? So it's not such a simple process. I'm not going through the whole therapy of it. Obviously there's a lot to do. But the goal is, whatever it is that you do, you want to get, what do you want to do? You don't want to destroy them. You want to free the positive energies, that if you could harness them towards something that's equally passionate in the good, they won't have to direct it there. It was like, let's say a person's drinking poison because they think they're thirsty. So here, take a drink, just as good as the poison, maybe better. And I'm not telling you not to drink. You see a lot of times that's what happens. So it's about harnessing, but there's two steps in the process. First, you have to free the
redirecting energy.
Exactly. That's cool. Yeah, and you have to rechannel and harness. What that means is, first you have to obviously split it apart, because a person is consumed with that. You have to be somewhere that you break it apart. That requires usually you're hitting rock bottom, or like he says, you're at psycho. You need something to jolt them out of there. It usually happens when people really they come to a point of they can't go worse. So that shakes people up, because they see how bad it could be. But there's other ways as well. I'm just using an example. Obviously, the Rebbe Rashab is much more subtle level here. But the point is that Vayishlach shezehu, this tzaikas halev, what it does is lahafrit. You separate. So I slept you out of prison, but doesn't mean the guy's not going back in a moment later. So that's what you need. Acheives yisala. Then you take the good and you elevate it into Atzilus. I'm just explaining this in simpler aces, what he means. So biyah is a place of the garments, traps it all, like in the hostage part, the thorns, and you want the flower to be redeemed and freed and be elevated back to Atzilus. That's what he's saying here. What?
This is the Chakora, the Nefesh Bahamas.
I don't know why you're saying that. I don't know what you mean by that. As opposed to?
As opposed to the Nefesh, we thought different about different ideas of Nefesh of the Keys, explains the Nefesh Bahamas, and Nefesh Bahamas has recognition that it gets lost by itself. There seems to be what we're talking about here.
Oh, you mean by you're comparing it to what we discussed? I don't know. I'm not sure. Here, it sounds to me like more. It doesn't say here how the person gets to this. It just says He says he comes to Rishbei cycle of. I'm saying it doesn't say who provoked him. I gave the example of rock bottom. That's not, but that example not necessarily. That was just an example. Doesn't mean that's the only way. It could be other ways as well. Whatever. It could also be comes Asher Shemei Tshuva, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. A person has this. Huh? The Ayin Sham Ba'bir, and look there in the beer, meaning the beer, I guess, in the Likutei Torah B'Midbar. Look, if you look in those Maimorim, clearly the Rebbe Rashab is taking Maimorim that he is explaining them and connecting them all. And the truth is, every chapter is really this is what's happening, except he doesn't always tell you his sources. Okay. Ayin Sham Ba'bir. Okay. Omnam Kamoikeinu Gam B'Chitzenis Alev. Now this is why he wrote this parentheses. Because according to above, it seems that, remember, this has to all stim, has to all be consistent with what we learned earlier. What we learned earlier, that the nekudah, the Evan, is both in malchus and it goes into biyah, and we learned in biyah itself there's two levels, if you remember. Remember it says mistateres b'biyah? No, that was the first level. There was the two levels.
How the nekudah itself goes in, and there's the
right. So my understanding is probably explaining all those levels here. So right now, according to this Maimorim, as he said V'teisef Esther, that's Pnimius Halev. What about Chatzenius Halev? What about the outer dimension of the heart? So he says now, Omnam Kamoikeinu Gam B'Chatzenius Halev. The same thing, however, this is also true, not just as he said in that Maimer V'teisef Esther, Pnimius Halev. This is also true in Chatzenius Halev, in avodah. That it gets concealed in the animal soul. That it is, in order for there to be the refinement through the work, through divine comprehension, and the awakening of love and awe and respect, everybody according to their heart, their level. Okay, he's very brief here, but there's a key difference between Chatzenius Halev and Pnimius Halev. If you look by Pnimius Halev, the words were Rish Be'esh, Ritzaikis Halev, B'tfila Tshuva. Rish Be'esh is flaming fires, is passion. Ritzaikis Halev is a cry, a deep cry from the heart, during davening Tshuva. Now he's saying divine contemplation and the awakening of Aviyah. Why? Because Pnimius Halev is coming from a very deep anguish place. Not necessarily negative, but it's coming from from the deep depths of your heart. Chatzenius Halev is more I'm going to say superficial, but it's a more outer level. It's an outer level. So what he's saying here is that everything we discussed about the rose being concealed in the thorns, malchus going into biyah, where there you have Esther, in other words, is not just Pnimius Halev. Before he spoke about it all Pnimius Halev, that Esther is really Pnimius Halev, and it's all there except it's concealed. Right? Now he's saying there's another thing the Nefesh Habamas does. It also conceals on the outer dimension of the heart. And this too, in other words, there's two things the animal soul is doing to us. It's concealing the depths of your passions to the divine, but it's also concealing your basic relationship with the divine on a more revealed level. I would say it's almost like a misprit and siprit, almost like gvul and beligvul. Bedakus in a subtle way. In other words, malchus goes down there, and our neshama, you could both have two things are being concealed by the animal soul. Your basic relationship with God on a basic revealed level. You know, that you study, that you feel, but then there's also the depths of your heart that's also being concealed. And the purpose of it all is for us to, what Yaakov did was to turn that nekudah into a. So malchus is being concealed in two ways, basically. No, he doesn't say that. He says they're both from the Nefesh Habamis. So they're both the Nefesh Habamis. That may be the difference between how malchus, the first level, is concealed in biyah. Let me say, probably. And then, no, I think it's in the second itself. In the second level itself. Okay. We'll sum it up and I finish this. Okay, after the parentheses, v'nekudah yashlemer, and this nekudah we can say. Let me say what was before the parentheses. Sham shachas ha'adam u'mayla la'iris ha'ratzon. Oh, here we go. The nekudah we can say. Why is it a nekudah? Before he said it's a nekudah because it's all concealed. No, my mistake. No, nekudah is actually a positive. We have here malchus is completely concealed, but there is a point there. There is something there. It's like we say, you may be asleep, but your heart is awake. I'm asleep, but my heart is awake. The Knesset Yisrael, he said before, look at the beginning of the chapter. Nekudah halev b'chinas knesel kameshu b'chinas katnus, but it's in a state of katnus. It's only amunah. That's how he first interpreted it. Then he said, Gam yesh leimer, that this is talking about how it comes down in a concealed world. Okay, and now the nekudah is not amunah. Now he's explaining according to the second interpretation. There's two interpretations in the example. One was just in general that it's a state of kfir. You need to force the nefesh habamis is in its full intensity, and through amunah you just you have the nekudah halev. Everyone has the pintel yid, the spark. That's only in a state of cotton. It's a very diminished state. Now he's explaining that this is how malchus is manifest in all the garments of this world, that the nefesh habamis conceals. Before he didn't speak about nefesh habamis. Before he just said that it's just the work that you do, the beginning of your work. It's plain faith. Yeah. And you impose yourself on and the amunah poses itself on the nefesh habamis. And then akamas malchus is when acheives hadas, when you develop it. Now, this explanation, you understand the difference? The first one, again, I want to just say it for myself at least. The first one is just saying that you have, all you have is all you have is faith, but you have no maturity yet. And what do you do with that faith? You just impose. Based on that, you just follow the rules. You do the mitzvahs, he says, without kavanah, just you force yourself to do it. That was the interpretation. And what's hakamas malchus? That's when you develop and you mature and you think about it. The second is talking about how the deeper, the nefesh lakis is now manifesting in the nefesh habamis. And it's coming into all the levushim, like you said, all the thorns. It's concealing everything. Where a person is completely immersed in this world. And now you have to extract in that concealed place.
The first way he's not manifesting, he's just manipulating.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. He's not refining the nefesh habamis. It's the simplest thing. It's what most people do. It's mechanical almost. Pure skaf, you're overriding. And here he says kedei levader. It's in order to refine.
Even a akamas malchus is you term it like that?
No, not a akamas malchus. Akamas malchus is when you he doesn't spell it out. But it sounds like it's already, you're working with it, and that's there.
Later on he says that.
Also, hold on a second. Look on Akamas malchus. Akamas malchus. It's a good question. You have to say it's Akamas malchus there. Is what? You're taking it. It's not just that. But here, now he continues on and says, now he's talking how it goes into the animal soul, and we're involved and trapped here. And you're doing something about it. You're not just overriding, as you put it. It's not just that. You're actually refining it. But what's the nekudah here? There, the nekudah was the amunah is what keeps you going. What's here? What keeps you going here when you're trapped among the thorns? She says, you could say this is the transmission of a higher reflection, to awaken the desire within the soul. Like the expression, until there'll be there'll be an awakening above us, from the ruach mamarim, from the spirit from above. Like we're talking here like a spontaneous awakening. A person has an epiphany, or some type of pisim. Pisim is spontaneous, Al nafshe. Like it says in the nekudah, this is the adam ki Yaakov that I mentioned, that Ye'un Sham, that's what he talks about there. Look there. So I'm going to have to go there. That's going to require. So the point is, okay. So the nekudah is, let's see how he says it in the Kitzur. Well, b'aveda yeshlemer, and the b'aveda we can say, what's yeshlemer what? The malchus, the nekudah of malchus, the point of malchus that it goes down into the world. What is that in aveda? Dugmas in haislapshus hu akfiyah b'peil. An example of the slapshus of malchus is kfiyah b'peil, meaning that you are you compel yourself, you force yourself, you coerce, you override, as you put it. Yeah. V'nekudah hi hanekudah halev b'chinas hamuna. Oh, and what's a nekudah? When you say there's a point here, there's something to begin. There's an even. When Yaakov made the even of Matzeva, there was something there. Nekudah halev is the spark in the heart, state of amunah. Gam yashlemer, the second interpretation. Another way I can explain it. Can also say it's not a different. It's not a opposing explanation. It's just another gam, an additional explanation. His slapshus is almus hanefesh alakiz b'nefesh habamis. The slapshus is that there's actually the concealment of the divine soul in the animal soul, b'chinas Esther, state of Esther. Rachel, b'chinas is galus haratzon l'kus. Rachel is a state where there's the revealed desire to the divine. Ve'Esther kishanefesh habamis master is when the animal soul conceals, covers up. And this is in order that there should be the refinement through davening. What's the nekudah here? We can say this is, he just doesn't use those words, but that's what it says in Nekudah Teira. That's when you have an awakening in a moment, a grace, a moment from that the Susa Leila, a higher awakening from above, awakens you below. That's the nekudah. So that's the big difference between the two of them. The first one, it's not an awakening from above, it's your inner spark, your amunah overrides the animal soul. And here, it actually manifests, and there's a higher force that awakens you to free yourself.
In the first shot, I mean, what nekudah halev b'chinas hamuna is not also like similar to Sus Leila.
No.
Said the dugmas in Yislapshu is hu akfiyah b'poel, and then the nekudah, it's more like a.
Nekudah is your soul by its own merit has a connection all the time. There's no awakening. That's why you have to force yourself, because there's nothing. You're not. In the second one, you're actually changing the nefesh habamis. You're fighting with it. You have power. So the spark itself of amunah is not enough, basically, for you to engage in nefesh habamis. You're now involved. Your whole mind and heart is involved in business. Let's say you're not thinking. Your heart is there consumed. Here, the second one, you have awakening from above that says, I got to get out of this place.
It's a more long-term solution.
More long-term and more transformative, but also more manifest. The other one is more detached. The other one, you just ignore the nefesh habamis, basically. You don't even engage with it. Here you're engaging. It's basically, it's clearly different ways of explaining the nekudah that we spoke before. I'm not sure why he's saying all these levels, but maybe we'll understand it as we go further. We probably will. But basically, he's explaining all the levels. There's no question that this is consistent with the previous chapter. I was thinking that maybe it's the two levels in malchus that he said at the end of the chapter. Now I'm not sure. I have to really review it again. But it's clearly the levels we spoke about, because the previous chapter there was also a bunch of levels, if you recall. Yeah. You know what it is? I said it before. The previous chapter, besides that there's two things in malchus that goes in biyah, he said there's also two interpretations too. One is malchus and atzilus. That's a nekudah that Yaakov makes into matzeva. So no, that's malchus even before. Then it goes gam yeshlemer, middle of the chapter. We spoke a whole second explanation. Gam yeshlemer b'chinas nekudah b'chinas malchus mislabeshes b'biyah. And there he also said two things. So it sounds to me that this is very similar to these two. I'm not sure exactly. I think it's two things in malchus going into biyah. That seems to be the case. But you could say not that way. You could say it's also the other way. That the first parish. Let's see. He's not finished. Okay. We shall stop here. So we did chapter 110, page 213 and 214.